Roland paused mid-step, his hammer still ready to strike, while Elodie's words hung in the air. The Baskerville knight's eyes widened as he came to some sort of realization, and his face was a mix of disbelief and anger. "Are you actually?" A question was thrown, and it indicated that his opponent knew something. His face had been revealed, and there was an implication that came with it. He had never met this person without wearing his suit of armor, nor did anyone know how the missing Arden sibling. However, there was one particular thing about his family that set it apart from the others. It seemed that their father's genes took over when it came to male offspring, but when it came to females, they took the mother's side of the family. This was also the reason why his brother Robert instantly recognized him a few years back. "Why, you're one of them, right? Why, you must be Robert." Now this all makes sense. It seemed that this man had come in contact with his family members, and this was not anything out of the ordinary. The Baskerville Knight family in a way took over the responsibilities of the Arden estate. That was previously also one of Castellane's guard dogs. Even after Wentworth Arden rose to his position of proper nobility, the Baskerville Knights continued to maintain a close relationship with them, due to their shared history of loyalty and service. When he was between the ages of 5 and 10, he had witnessed them as well, and through those exchanges, he came to know of the three Cerberus Knights. It wasn't strange to assume that this person had seen either his eldest brother Rainer or the second Edwin. He didn't seem to know Robert at all, but the resemblance was there, and it seemed that his identity as one of the Ardens had been exposed. "No, how could you be Robert? This strength, not even the firstborn was this capable. Could you be? What does it matter who I am?" Roland stopped for a moment, but then resumed his approach. He knew why Elothes was confused, as Roland's power was just too high. At most, he could assume that he was some bastard who had been born before Rainer. It wouldn't make sense for Robert to be strong enough to take out the Cerberus trio on his own. "No, wait. If you're from the Arden family, please reconsider. Do you want a war to break out between the families? Do you think you can win against the Castellane house?" Roland paused once more, but his hammer was still clenched tightly. The mention of potential conflict between the Arden and Castellane families made him contemplate the issue. It was true that any action he took here could have negative repercussions, not just for himself but for his family as well. He had raised his hand in opposition to Viola Castellane and already killed some of the Baskerville Knights, with Andreas being the most prominent one. While the other side started the conflict, some might say that he had overreacted. "You tried to murder me and Lucienne Arden as well. Now that you are defeated, you seek a truce?" Elothes struggled to rise from the swampy ground, but he seemed to be trying to make amends. "Please, my friend, think about it. I had no choice in this matter. I'm sure that you understand. People like us have no choice in these matters. I was just following orders." Roland's expression remained unreadable as he listened to Elothes' plea, but his mind was racing. There were potential consequences of continuing with his actions now. He understood the balance between the noble houses, and how they would probably not let this issue rest so easily. It would be clear to the Castellane household that he was the man responsible for all of this. But what are the other options here? If I let this bastard go, he will report all of it, and they might just come back with more forces or even hire an assassin. If one strategy didn't work, it was useful to use another. While it was true that the Baskerville and Castellane families would probably back off for a moment, they would hold a grudge. The issue could potentially be dropped, as it would put the other families in a bad light. The only thing that nobles feared than the higher nobility was bad rumors. There was a possibility that they would halt their advances and even issue a public apology. However, after the overreaction he witnessed today, Roland wasn't sure if they would honor anything. "I understand your predicament, but it doesn't sound very genuine when you're just trying to distract me. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" For a moment he did give it a thought. Revealing himself could potentially have this whole thing end without any future bloodshed. While he didn't see the Castellane family apologizing for this issue, it was possible to make amends and form some type of binding contract that would safeguard his sister. Both sides would come to some kind of agreement and let things rest, but it wouldn't be so, as the surviving Roman had been lingering in the background. Shit. Roland had managed to rip off this man's arm, but he was still a Tier 3 class holder. With enhanced bones and internal organs, even without an arm, it was still possible to move around. People at this tier had advanced from being regular humans and were closer to monsters. "It seems that you wish to negotiate with your swords raised?" Roman didn't reply as he used his legs to toss himself in Roland's direction. His body was fast, but his movements lacked finesse due to the missing arm. Despite this, he managed to close the distance between them surprisingly quickly. With his remaining hand, he wielded his sword with murderous intent and attempted to aim it at his exposed throat. However, Roland had already seen this movement thanks to the Mana Phantom, and before the strike could connect, it was sidestepped. His opponent tried to quickly gather himself, but it was too late. His Overlord's Might skill was still in effect, and it gave him a clear advantage over this injured knight. He bashed the man with his shield to knock him off balance, then followed up with a swift strike from the spiky side of his hammer. While the man was wearing some armor, he was still able to puncture through it. Then through this opening, he directly injected a large quantity of magical energy into the man's body. Even though he was a Tier 3 class holder, his insides started to rupture. Roman convulsed in agony as his insides were liquefied in an instant. His body flew into the distance and landed in a shallow puddle filled with swamp water. There it started spasming before his life finally came to an end. Elithes had managed to gather himself off the ground, but his legs were shaking. He found himself surrounded by a large group of golems that had managed to restore themselves. All of them were pointing their eyes and cannons in his direction. Wait. Do you really want to start a war that you can't hope to win between the families? Think rationally. Oh, I am quite rational. What war? What families? You assume that I'm part of the Arden estate. But am I really? What proof do you have? What? And if I was, I would be quite justified in defending my sister's honor, wouldn't I? Roland pointed at the man with his hammer which was already glowing. The large group of golems did the same as they aimed at the injured knight. Soon a salvo of beams exploded from all directions, all aiming at the lone knight in the middle. While he tried to evade them, he found himself unable to due to the sheer volume. Yet, they were nothing more than distractions, with the glowing hammer being the true ray of death. No, please spare me. I swear to keep silent about everything that happened. The man cried out in pain as multiple energy bolts bounced off his body. Due to his Tier 3 prowess, they just created shallow wounds and pain. However, eventually, a bright flash ended him as Roland's swirling attack connected with the man's chest cavity and drilled right through it. The dungeon fell silent once more. The only sounds echoing through the cavern were the crackling of fading magic and the distant drips of water. Roland stood amidst the aftermath of the battle, his expression quite solemn. The Cerberus knights that were famous within this region lay defeated, and their bodies were without any signs of life. After taking a deep breath, Roland let the tension drain from his muscles. Despite this victory, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The consequences of his actions could be dire, as the men here were important figures within the kingdom. Their disappearance would be noticed, and many new foes could appear on the horizon. They didn't really leave me a choice here. There were other knights within the dungeon, and he knew that it would probably be impossible for him to get to all of them. It was also probable that another unit was waiting above ground, waiting for the report from their leaders. There was no reason to chase any more people down, nor did he want to shed more blood on this day. Killing didn't bring him much joy, and he knew that everyone was just following orders. He also knew he had to tread carefully from here on out. The Baskerville Knights were a powerful and influential family, and their demise would not go unnoticed. The Castellane household, too, would likely seek retribution for the loss of their knights. Luckily, they all would think twice about attacking him again after this fiasco, and would likely forego any immediate future attempts at his life. I'm sure I'll be public enemy number 1 for them at least. They probably won't care much about Lucien past this point, nor do they really know who I am. While his face was similar, there was no real proof that he was part of the Arden estate, nor was the conversation here revealed to anyone yet. As long as he kept silent about everything, no one would be the wiser. The Baskerville Knights would probably also not disclose any information as it made them look bad. They were unable to defeat a lone rune magician after ambushing him in a dungeon, not something they would want to be spread around. However, at the moment his mind was deliberating something else. While the 3 knights had been vanquished, there was a 4th person involved, Professor Ulfine. She had been knocked out by him before he dismantled the trio but was still alive. His instincts were telling him that perhaps killing this woman would be a wise choice, as she might have caught the conversation that could expose his true identity. She was nothing more than a hired goon in his eyes who tried to murder him and his sister, not someone he would lose much sleep over. While eliminating her might seem like the logical choice to tie up loose ends, he also considered the potential consequences of such an action. Killing her might attract unwanted attention from the Institute or other powerful entities she might be affiliated with. On the other hand, letting her live would also pose risks. Would the other teachers from the Institute even believe him? It was possible that once she awoke, Professor Ernest would swoop in to aid her. He did not know who he could really trust, and if she was allowed to talk to anyone, then perhaps the whole academy would go after him, even before he could show them any recordings that would absolve him of any crimes. Roland weighed his options carefully, while one of the golems returned his helmet to his side. With the help of the Mage Hand spell, the helmet seemingly floated up and descended onto his head. It had been broken in a few places, but with the help of his skill, it was reformed once more, and quickly magnetized itself to the rest of his armor. With his arsenal now fully restored, he deliberated this issue further, but was unable to come to a decision as some other trouble made itself known. "Young man, how about you leave that one to me?" A new voice sounded from the side, something that he didn't expect. Even though he had lost his helmet with the main monitoring system within, his senses were sharp. Unless it was some type of assassin of tier 3 or up, he would have probably noticed something. His golems had some detection capabilities, but this person was right there, just a few meters from the position he now stood. "Who are you?" He quickly turned in the direction of this voice to see a peculiar phenomenon. At first, it looked like a person, but something wasn't right. They weren't really there. It was some kind of illusion or magical body. The figure before Roland seemed to be a manifestation of mana, but it was somewhat different. His Eyes of Mana skill was still active, and it was giving him some conflicting information. Wait, is this spiritual energy, not mana? It looks like a mana phantom. Could this person be? It finally hit him. This person was not an illusion, nor was it a hologram, it was a specter. Roland recalled the description that Arian had given him of the Institute's spiritualist, and this old lady fit the bill. She wasn't very tall and hunched forward while holding a cane in her right hand. Her nose was somewhat large and elongated. Her face had several large warts, and she was also wearing a large hat, which made her look like an evil witch from old fables. It's just how Arian described. I thought he was exaggerating with the description. How rude. Shouldn't you introduce yourself first, young man? My apologies. I am Assistant Professor Wayland from the Institute. He mentioned his current hidden name, but he wasn't sure how much this person had heard of his conversations with the now-past Elethes. Considering that he was talking with a spiritualist who could talk with the dead, this was troublesome. Was his secret exposed already, or would it be soon after? "Oh, you're that new fellow from the Institute? What brings you here? The advancement classes? Oh right, there was that." It seemed the spiritualist, despite her eerie appearance, was not immediately hostile towards him. However, letting his guard down was not an option. She clearly came out from hiding to keep him from sending Ulfine into the afterlife. It seemed that she wanted to protect this woman who had wronged him. "I must say, you made quite a mess inside the dungeon," the old woman commented while looking around. The bodies of his 3 enemies were still there, and the blood was quite fresh. "I was just defending myself. They initiated the attack, and I had no other choice." "Oh, don't worry, young man. I'm not judging you, but next time try to keep it down. It's hard to concentrate while the spirits are in such disarray." Sure. He wasn't sure what to make of this old lady. She seemed unperturbed by the circumstances that led to the deaths of these men. "What are your intentions, Professor Fortuna, I assume? I guess I don't need to introduce myself then." "My intentions? Well, isn't it obvious? I'm here to ensure that justice is served, young man. But it didn't look like you needed any help, so I just waited." "You waited in justice? If I may ask, what are your intentions with Professor Ulfine?" Professor Fortuna let out a cackling laugh, which echoed eerily in the cavernous dungeon. "Oh, my intentions with dear Ulfine? Don't worry, young man, she won't be bothering anyone anytime soon." Roland couldn't help but feel suspicious of the old spiritualist. The lady was giving him goosebumps for some reason, and it felt like she was quite dangerous. While they were talking, a large quantity of will-o'-the-wisp spectral monsters appeared around the area. Their numbers were quite large, but this wasn't all. This woman's spectral avatar was quite something too. The magical fluctuations it was giving off were tremendous. It wasn't hard for a mage to measure their opponent's strength through the spells the other party was using. This person he was now up against wasn't simple and potentially had more mana than even he had. Considering that the Institute let her live in the dungeon and even allowed her to ignore meetings, made her probably into a special existence. She was perhaps someone quite powerful, maybe even someone that he wouldn't be able to go against. As Roland stood there, facing the enigmatic Professor Fortuna and more precisely, her strange spectral manifestations, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Her presence here was quite unsettling, and he couldn't even measure her strength properly, as she was nothing more than a conjured phantom made from spiritual energy. "Professor Fortuna, if you intend to intervene, may I ask about your stake in this matter?" He posed his question while the will-o'-the-wisps around the area increased in numbers. Roland wasn't sure what to think about this old lady's involvement. If she witnessed the whole fight from a safe distance, it was probable that she saw his face and knew about his true identity. What she would do with this knowledge was unknown, but he wasn't sure if he would be able to stop her if she chose to leak it. You wish to know my reasoning, young lad? How about we change our location? This isn't really the greatest place to have a chat. Would you join me for some tea? Some tea, Professor? That's right. I'm sure you'll enjoy my special brew, young man. It was quite a surprise that he was invited to go to her abode. Roland knew that the spiritualist from the Institute lived in the dungeon, so this was a chance to get what he came here for. His main goal was to meet this woman and analyze her spells to help him with his Phantom Runelim project. Already, as he was looking at the strange energies, he was making recordings for future use. Professor Fortuna was not an ordinary figure, and Arian had already informed him about her. Considering that she was left alone to live in this dungeon made her unique, and he wasn't sure if he could refuse her request. The magical energies around him were starting to gather, but luckily their aim was not him, but Professor Ulfine, whom he knocked out. The will-o'-wisps that had been intensifying in the area gathered around her body and began to lift her up. It looked like she was floating on a cloud made from spiritual energy that pulsated from time to time. It was clear that this woman didn't account for his opinion in this matter, and killing Ulfine to tie up this loose end would probably be impossible. Yet, for some reason, he felt like she wouldn't leak any incriminating information. Special brew? I'll accept the offer then. Wonderful. Please follow me then, it won't take long. Well, Roland didn't really want to follow this old woman to her lair. He needed to see what she would do with Ulfine. Considering her reputation, it was probably safe. But if not, then escaping would probably always be an option. Arian would have not lied to him, and she wasn't known for being openly hostile to other Institute members. Thus, after considering his options and the possibility of making a breakthrough with his research, he decided to go with her. With a nod, Roland followed Professor Fortuna as she led the way deeper into the dungeon. The will-o'-wisps floated around them, casting an eerie light that danced along the swamp water and trees. Roland remained vigilant, his senses on high alert, but the old spiritualist seemed nonchalant, as if they were simply taking a leisurely stroll. As they walked, Roland couldn't help but notice the strange fog gathering around them. It had encompassed them fully and made seeing anything past a few meters impossible. Only thanks to his enhanced mapping device was he able to keep track of his position, which his golems that were outside were keeping track of. However, in just a second something happened that jumbled up his entire map. Dimensional shift? Oh, you're quite a perceptive young man. The Institute must be glad that such a youngster is one of their professors. The old lady chuckled as he blurted out the sentence out loud. A dimensional shift had occurred, which meant that he had gone through something similar to a teleportation gate. After going through the Institute that was filled with dimensional magic, he became quite sensitive to the changes. He had also included sensors in his armor to feel out for such magics. That was some high-level magic. I only noticed it once I was passing through it. I should be really careful here. All sorts of red flags were going off in his head, but he needed to continue. It was now too late to turn back, even more so now that he found himself without his golems that had been left behind on the first floor of this B-rank dungeon. The signal isn't coming through. Either there is a magical barrier around this place, or I'm really deep underground. He was certain that he had been brought to one of the lower levels of the dungeon, where Professor Fortuna's home was. The moment he saw it, he was even more reminded of old fables from his original world. This woman already looked like some type of evil witch, but her home also filled the bill. They were still inside of a swampland, and before him was something that looked quite interesting. She's not going to throw me in the oven and try to eat me, is she? While having some intrusive thoughts, he looked at the hut that was perched on a small island in the middle of a murky swamp. It was surrounded by a large quantity of vines and twisting trees. It exuded a strange aura of ancient magic, and had various symbols etched into the wooden walls. Many glowing orbs floated around the water, and he could see some strange apparitions within the depths. Here we are, young man. Welcome to my humble abode. Ah yes, it certainly looks welcoming. Roland hesitated for a moment before stepping onto the rickety wooden bridge that led to the entrance. His armor wasn't the lightest, so the wood creaked beneath his weight and added more to the eerie atmosphere. As he approached the hut, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was putting himself in danger, but at the same time, it was too late to retreat. He could only steel his nerves and try not to offend this witch-like woman. Professor Fortuna seemed entirely at ease as she opened the door and beckoned him inside. Roland followed with his senses on high alert and ready for any sign of danger. The interior of the hut was dimly lit by flickering candles, which cast shadows across the wooden walls. "Please, make yourself comfortable and I'll have that tea ready in no time," Professor Fortuna said, gesturing to a wooden chair by a small table. Roland nodded warily, but before taking the seat he looked at the second guest, Professor Ulfine. She was still being transported by the bunch of glowing orbs, and being led to what seemed to be the cellar of this witch-like hut. "What are you going to do with her?" "Don't you worry, young man. She will be dealt with according to the Institute's rules, and don't worry, your little secret will be safe with me." The apparition of the old woman chuckled a bit before vanishing from sight. Roland was skeptical of the whole situation, but at the moment the woman had not shown any animosity towards him. It was better to remain a good guest and ask about his research. The only problem was bringing it up. He wasn't really sure why she invited him here in the first place, which made him a little bit nervous. Once the spirit version of the witch was gone, he was left to his own devices inside of the strange hut. To not push his luck too much, he decided to just take a seat on the chair that was presented to him and wait. The dimly lit interior of the hut, coupled with the strange atmosphere of the swamp outside, made him want to leave. Minutes passed, and he could hear some strange creaking sounds of wood below him, probably where Ulfine had been carried out to. Her fate was something he was interested in, but the woman already assured him that she would be dealt with. Finally, the sound of footsteps broke the silence as Professor Fortuna returned, now in her true corporal form. She carried a tray with a steaming teapot and a couple of cups that were floating around her. "My apologies, these old bones don't move as well as they used to." The woman looked almost identical to the spectral form she presented herself as. Her skin was wrinkled and weathered, but her eyes shone with a sharp intelligence, and her smile held a hint of mischief. Roland couldn't help but feel a sense of unease in her presence, but he remained composed while trying to think of a way to ask her for some insights into spiritual magics. "No need to apologize, Professor Fortuna. Thank you for the tea," Roland replied politely, trying to maintain a respectful demeanor despite his reservations. The old woman poured the tea into the cups and handed one to Roland, before taking a seat across from him. Instantly, he activated his helmet to make a chemical and magical analysis of the brew. While his system wasn't perfect, it was capable of identifying compounds that could cause harm to his body. Luckily, this brew didn't seem to be anything more than regular green tea, so he chose to take a sip. "So, young man, you wish for me to help you with your research?" That is correct, but how did you?" Before Roland could finish his question, Professor Fortuna chuckled softly, interrupting him. "My dear boy, I am a spiritualist of the highest order. I see and understand much more than you may realize, but in this case, I had some help. Do you perhaps remember the book that our headmistress lent you?" "That book? Yes, I was the one that wrote it." Roland had been given the book by the Institute headmistress Yevena Arvandis. The book was quite old, but so was this woman. It seemed that she was the author. Sometimes books could have tracking spells placed on them, and would inform authors of their location. Perhaps this was the case, and when he started his research into spiritual mana, she had been informed about it. "Ah, I see, so you wrote that book. It was quite insightful, I must say," Roland replied, carefully choosing his words. "But indeed, I am glad you found it helpful. But it seems you have questions beyond what the book could offer. However, before we go down that road, could you answer one of my questions?" The old woman's eyes sparkled with curiosity as she leaned forward and started performing some type of magical skill. He could tell that she was focusing her mana into her eyes and performing some sort of identification incantation. It was different than a regular analyzing skill, and filled with that unique spiritual mana he was trying to research. "A question? Of course, as long as it's something I can answer," Roland responded while trying to keep his tone as polite as possible. He didn't want to reveal any personal information, but it seemed that this old woman had something entirely different in mind. After leaning back into her chair, she posed her question. "Young man, tell me, how did you end up with a soul like that? How is it devoid of this world's blessing? Are you not of this world?" This was not something that he had expected. The question took him by surprise. He had no idea what she meant with the world's blessing, but he could somewhat tell what she was implying. "The world's blessing? I'm not sure I understand, Professor." For the time being, he decided to feign ignorance as he wasn't sure where this was going. It seemed that something about his soul was indicating that he was not a person from this world. While this was obviously true, he was not expecting anyone to actually be able to see through his origin. He had been transported to this world through strange means, and put into the body of a dead Roland Arden. If he was exposed as some type of specter possessing his body, This could very well bode his end. You don't? Well, that's not surprising. Not many mages practice spiritualism, nor are even interested in anything besides binding souls to their will. Let me explain then. The old woman sounded quite cheery, but he wasn't sure what her intentions were. The amount of mana permeated the walls in this strange hut, and he could feel another shift coming. Before him, space started to vanish, and it was replaced by a black void that started to fill out by what seemed to be stars. Yes, this is the emptiness that surrounds our whole world. It's filled out by many celestial bodies. Soon the planet he inhabited had shown itself, and it was quite a detailed representation of it. He could even see the continent this kingdom resided in quite clearly. However, this didn't seem to be the focal point of the presentation, as the planet started shrinking down. Not many know this, but our world is protected by the gods and spirits. Nothing can slip into it without their knowledge. Something akin to a force field appeared to surround their globe along with the moon surrounding it, and moved even further away to engulf the sun. It encompassed the whole solar system along with several other planets that were part of it. At this point, this was nothing that he didn't know, as these were all facts documented within scripts. However, the strange barrier was the focal point, and he was not sure what it was for. Our realm isn't the only one. There are also other ones like the spirit realm or the demonic void. But I'm sure you're aware of this. Yes, every child knows the legends of how the world was created and how the gods separated our realms. How wonderful. But did you know that whenever a new soul is born, it receives the blessing of the spirit tree? A blessing? No, I don't think that such an event was ever mentioned in the texts or legends. In this world, there were multiple deities like Solaria, and even evil gods like the one from the Abyssal cult. After death, it was said that a person would be sent to heaven representing the god that they worshipped. Depending on the god it differed, and if a non-believer existed, they were said to be reincarnated into another being with their previous memories being erased. Roland wasn't sure if he fit in either category, as he was a person from a different world, and it seemed that this woman was trying to imply this. Each of our souls receives the blessing of the spirit tree, imbuing each of us with a unique color. Every living person with a soul possesses one, or at least should. It seems that your soul lacks the blessing. Quite intriguing. Yes, quite, but I don't really have an answer for that question. This is the first time I've heard of such a thing. The old woman paused, her gaze glued to Roland's form, as if she were trying to decipher something. Roland was unwilling to inform her about his true origins, and he wasn't sure if anyone would actually believe him. There was also no way of knowing what would happen if the truth came out. Would he be seen as some sort of anomaly and studied in a lab? Or perhaps seen as a demon that needed to be killed? That was a lie, wasn't it? You do know. Suddenly the candlelight flickered across the old woman's face that became more dastardly. The shadow seemed to accentuate her sudden change in demeanor, making her features seem more demonic. Roland felt a chill run down his spine. There was something wrong here, and perhaps he had made a mistake by coming here. Suddenly, as he tried to stand up, he felt himself unable to. It was as if a few tons were weighing him down. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Professor. It might be better if we postpone this conversation. Oh, but my dear boy, I think that we could chat some more. What secrets are you hiding? The woman's voice became more commanding. It was as if the sweet grandma's personality was just a facade, hiding something much darker beneath. Roland realized he was in a precarious situation, trapped in this strange hut with a powerful spiritualist, who seemed to be a tier above him. Her mana was suppressing his, to such an extent that he couldn't even budge from this wooden chair. However, just as everything seemed to have gone wrong, something strange occurred. A greenish haze of energy encompassed him, and suddenly, he found himself surrounded by a mass of strange vines that were seemingly protecting him. The vines twisted and writhed around Roland, forming a protective barrier between him and Professor Fortuna. They seemed to emanate a soothing energy, countering the oppressive force that had been weighing him down moments before. Roland looked around in astonishment, unsure of where these vines had come from, or how they were aiding him. Luckily, soon a small figure formed from within these vines and started speaking out. Old hag, what do you think you are trying to do? Of course, it had to be you, ancient fossil. Old hag, ancient fossil. It was instantly clear that these people knew each other and had some history. The spiritualist lady wasn't pleased with the appearance of the vines and was staring daggers at the small figure that was speaking. The facial features weren't quite well, but he could recognize that this person was the Institute headmistress, Yevena Arvandus. He was not sure how and why she decided to aid him, but he was grateful nonetheless. Power seemed to be returning to his limbs, and he could even use his mana now. I was just having a friendly chat with our young professor here, no reason to be rude and interrupt. Professor Fortuna leaned back in her chair while trying to act as if she didn't just disable Roland's whole body. It seemed like she was about to perform some strange experiments to see how his soul ended up in the state that it was. Friendly chat, you say? It seems to me that you were about to do something rather unpleasant to our young colleague. Yuvena retorted with her voice being stern while Roland remained silent. He was unsure how to interject in this conversation between two seemingly powerful Tier 4 class holders. From his perspective, it was quite hard for a Tier 3 to just disable him, even if they were close to ascending further. His mana was like a toddler's compared to these two, and the atmosphere was growing increasingly more charged with magical energy. Is this how you repay an old friend, Yuvena, by interfering in matters that don't concern you? Fortuna spat out her words in anger, while the whole hut began to shake. The will-o-wisps started turning red and shifting chaotically. It seemed that they were reacting to their master's mood swings. Roland could feel the magical energies crackling around him as the two powerful mages faced off. However, it was clear that the witch-like Lady Fortuna had the advantage as this was her lair they were in, and not at the Institute. I'm not here to argue with you, Fortuna, and if you continue, then I'll be forced to intervene directly. Yuvena was probably feeling that her power was wavering, but she didn't relent. The vines around Roland started to shift to create a strange structure. They started to form something in the form of an oval with a magical surface within. Roland could feel what type of magic was taking form there, and it was identical to the portal gate he had seen in one of the magical towers. As the vines continued to weave together to form the portal-like structure, Professor Fortuna started to waver. Her expression, which was scrunched up with animosity, began to show signs of softening. At first, it seemed like the two were on equal footing, but the moment Yuvena expressed her willingness to come here directly, the atmosphere in the room changed. The red soul orbs returned to their previous form, and eventually, the hut also stopped shaking. Now, my dear friend, don't do anything hasty. Professor Fortuna's tone had shifted from aggression to one of caution. Her eyes darted between Roland and the portal forming before them. It was evident that she had weighed her options and concluded that having the headmistress arrive here in person wouldn't be wise. Have you come to your senses, Fortuna? Or must I pay you a visit to refresh your memory about who enabled you to exist in that humble swamp of yours? Well, Roland wasn't sure about the history of these two powerful mages. It was clear that the headmistress held more power. Considering Fortuna's status as a Tier 4 class holder, it seemed plausible that she enjoyed certain privileges within the Institute. It would also explain why she wasn't reprimanded even when she didn't attend the faculty meetings, nor did she seem to hold any classes either. He remained seated and silent. As the situation was resolving itself by itself, it would be possible for him to activate his armor now and attempt to escape. But he still needed something from this old woman. While he had been constantly scanning this area for spiritual energy, it would be better if he had some samples he could examine for a more prolonged time. Eventually, the portal materialized and sprang to life. Within it, he could see the woman that he had met previously. Though uncertain of the mechanism, it seemed that during his visit to the headmistress's tower, she had somehow marked him. Perhaps some plant matter the size of mushroom sports had made its way onto his armor and remained dormant. Through them, she was able to control the plants in this hut, and created the portal thereafter. It was a magical feat beyond his current comprehension. Yes, you have made your point, dear headmistress, don't worry. I will treat your precious faculty member with respect. The portal remained in place while Fortuna scrambled around. She was clearly panicking at this point and fumbling her words around. The woman on the other side of the portal observed with a stern expression, not convinced by Fortuna's sudden change in demeanor. I know, this fine young man had come here to research the spirits. How about? After thinking for a moment, Fortuna conjured up a spell to order one of the spirit orbs to fly over to the table. Along with it was a large flash into which the soul orb squeezed into. This wasn't all as various other old books and texts about the subject matter Roland was researching flew over. How about this, my lad? It should be enough, right? It was as if the old lady was now pleading with him instead. Roland remained silent for a moment while looking at the items on the table. There was a lot of research material there, and along with it a will-o-wisp and a flash. With all of this, he was certain that he would be able to make a big leap in his research of analyzing the soul and mana relation. There wasn't really more that she could offer him, and it was better to get out of here before these two powerful mages changed their mind. Yes, this will suffice, Professor Fortuna. See, the young lad thinks it's enough. Now can you just leave me alone? The old lady was quite annoyed with the situation, but had also resigned herself to her fate. The tension inside this wooden hut was starting to dissipate. The portal through which the headmistress was peeking in started to tremble, and it would probably close soon. Yevena Arvandus watched the exchange with a scrutinizing gaze, but she seemed satisfied with the outcome. I'm glad that we could clear this matter up, and I expect you to attend the next meeting at the Institute. We need to speak about a few things, understood? You want me to attend that boring? Fortuna frowned and returned to her previous self, but quickly resumed her docile act the moment she saw the Institute leader frowning through the portal. Yes, of course, I'll be sure to be there. Not a problem at all. Good, I'm glad that we could resolve this issue. Now, I'll be taking my leave, but remember, Fortuna, I'll be keeping an eye on you, and as for you, Assistant Professor Wayland, please come to my office when you return. Ah yes, of course, headmistress. He wasn't that taken aback by this order, as he was certain that the headmistress wanted to know about what happened in the swamp area. It was also something that could perhaps keep him safe again, as Fortuna needed to let him be if he ever was to reach Yevena's tower. With that warning, the headmistress withdrew from the portal, and it dissipated soon after. The wooden plant matter that it was created from wilted away into dried-out husks of its former self. He was now left alone with the woman who tried to use him as a lab rat. After glancing at her, he could hear her awkwardly clearing her throat. Ahem, well then, young man, it seems we've come to the end of our little adventure. It would probably be better if you left now. I think so too. After slowly standing up without making any sudden movements, he took the research material that he had come here for. The old woman raised an eyebrow as he slid the items into his armor, where he was hiding a spatial compartment in. However, right before he left, the woman left him with a few words. I don't know what you are hiding, young man, but your soul is certainly unordinary, and it's not only the color, there is something underneath it. Underneath it? Indeed, if you wish, you could stay here, and we could get to the bottom of this very interesting issue. No, I think I should go back and make a report to the headmistress. The old woman had a strange glint in her eyes as she continued to mention his soul. She was probably not willing to prod any further without his consent, but he could always stay here and have her do it willingly. Roland knew that he was a denizen from another world and would rather keep that secret. There was a possibility that he would be turned into some sort of lab rat if this truth came out. Are you sure? Well, you can come back here if you change your mind. I'll keep that in mind. So did a strange journey to get more research material for the runic prosthesis finally end. Once he found himself outside the witch hut, everything started to fade away into fog. After walking for a few minutes, he recovered the connection to his golems that quickly rallied around him. The bodies of the 3 knights he defeated had begun to be absorbed by the swamp, which would hinder him in recovering their gear. Well, that happened. The battle was over, and he had managed to level up multiple times, as his 3 enemies were many levels above his. While it wasn't as much as he had received from battling the pseudo-tier 4 horror at his home, it was enough to make him progress fast. Name: Roland Arden, 196 lira. Classes: T3 Runesmith Overlord, 21 lira primary. T2 Runesmith Lord, 50 lira tertiary. T2 Runic Engineer, 50 lira secondary. T1 Mage, 25 lira X. T1 Runic Monoscribe, 25 lira X. T1 Runic Blacksmith, 25 lira X. HP: 41,278, 46,278. MP: 72,127, 89,275. SP: 62,524, 63,544. Strength: 308. Agility: 252. Dexterity: 343. Vitality: 322. Endurance: 355. Intelligence: 406. Willpower: 392. Charisma: 21. Luck: 12. Besides the few levels and stat increase, he had managed to acquire 1 new passive skill. Overlord's Resilience. Passive skill: heightens the resistance to almost all forms of mental attacks, and lowers the willpower required to resist them. It was a nice addition to his passives, and seemed to help out during stressful situations. It looked to be an all-encompassing skill that boosted his resistance to anything that would attack his mind. This probably included magical attacks, as well as ones through other skills or concoctions. Perhaps if he had this skill before entering the hut, he could have resisted the strange paralysis he suffered. Interesting, but what now? The gravity of the situation that he had been through started to set in. He had just destroyed a whole platoon of knights and 3 knight commander level enemies. Their bodies were sinking into the swamp and would be soon erased. However, he didn't fool himself into believing that this event wouldn't reach others. Some knights had escaped during the chase, and some others were probably stationed above ground. Once he left the dungeon, they would be there to confirm that he was still alive. There is no way those Baskerville bastards won't know that I did everything here. Roland started thinking. Was there a way to spin the outcome in his favor? Perhaps he could claim that the supposed Tier 4 spiritualist came to his aid and took care of the trio. However, he had already made his recording technology known, and it clearly showcased that he had been the one doing the slaying. If it ever came to a confrontation in the noble court, he would have no way of getting away from the situation. To make things worse, Professor Ulfine was one of them, and her fate was unknown to him. He did not know what Fortuna would do to Ulfine, and he was in no position to ask the old woman for it. At most, he could go to the headmistress to inquire about the woman's fate. If for some reason she was let go, then it wouldn't be strange if she reported to the Baskervilles who contracted her. He was now between a rock and a hard place. One hit on his life had already been carried out, and he had no reason to believe that those people would stop. He would probably be thoroughly investigated by his new enemies, which could even end up in Albrook. His identity was in real jeopardy now as he had made his power known. Then, to make things even worse, there was his little sister who was in the middle of this whole mess. Things are getting out of hand. What should I do? For the time being, he believed that he would be safe for some time. It wasn't plausible for the Baskerville Knights to go directly after him after failing so miserably. The same could be said for his sister. He could use this time to prepare for the worst, but what could he do? The only people that he could think of were Arian Thorne, and perhaps the headmistress. If he could get more help from them, then perhaps they could take care of Lucien in his absence. Now that he had all this research material, he could try to make a prototype prosthesis. The true reason that he was here. Once back in Albrook, he would be mostly safe, as even the Castellane house wouldn't dare to send assassins into the Valyrian territory. The only loose end would be his sister and what would happen when he was gone. First and foremost, he needed to check on his sister, Lucienne. Despite the chaos surrounding him, her well-being remained his top priority. Professor Ernest left with all the other students to let him analyze the anomaly. He wondered how he should explain this issue to the man who was probably tasked by Delore to observe him. For all he knew, they were all in on it. She could be in danger. I need to return. Having remains of the knights in his spatial bags would probably make things only harder to explain, so he decided to leave the non-devoured equipment alone. It was nothing that he couldn't recreate himself, so it was not worth the hassle. Their bodies would soon vanish from here without a trace, so it didn't matter that much. He had previously taken his own dimensional shield back from within the swamp area, and quickly ordered his golems to return to it. After around 5 minutes he was ready to leave. He could only hope that his sister was indeed safe, and that Ernest wasn't another mercenary for the Castellanes. Thus, with a quickened pace, he made his way through the swamp that was surprisingly devoid of adventurers. As he arrived at the stairs going up, his mind was abuzz with multiple countermeasures. The encounter was fresh in his mind, and he hadn't fully recovered from the clash with the 3 Knight Commander class enemies. His armor had also been damaged, and the runes on it had slightly deteriorated. If another enemy of the same caliber was waiting above ground, then he would have his work cut out for him.